you're from and which AG in particular you're asking the question to, if that's applicable. Other than that, I think we can get going. So I'd like to hand this over to AG Healey to start things off. So Maura, whenever you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. To my colleagues, General James of New York, General Ellison of Minnesota, thank you for your partnership. Thank you to you and your teams for all the work that you have done on this matter and making this a top priority. To my team in the Massachusetts Attorney General's office that has helped lead this work nationally, particularly Assistant Attorneys General Jillian Feiner and Sandy Alexander, who are with me today, and so many others across our office who made this fight a top priority and achieved the resolution we are announcing today. I want to thank you. 3 years ago, when I first announced my office's lawsuit against the Sacklers and their company, Purdue Pharma, I made a promise. I made a promise to the families that day that I would expose the full truth of what Purdue and the Sacklers had done. I spoke to some of those same families this morning, just a little while ago, about this resolution. These are families that have been advising my office, working with my office for a long time on this matter. In short, this is what we are announcing today. And what we are announcing today does reflect an accomplishment. I'll speak later about some of the problems and the problems with our current legal system, but let me tell you what we have done in the interim. Forgive me, I'm just having a technical issue here. In short, this is what we've accomplished. The Sacklers are paying $4.3 billion. We believe that's more than any law enforcement action has collected from individuals ever. And all of that money will go for treatment and care. The Sacklers will be permanently banned from the opioid business. Purdue Pharma will cease to exist. Every Sackler director and all of their CEOs have been required to answer our questions under oath. And the Sackler name won't be on any more buildings or hospital wings or museums. And most importantly, the public will witness the most significant disclosure in any case ever, including every piece of evidence Purdue has produced about its opioid business in the last 20 years. Tens of millions of documents that have never been seen before, never have been turned over, including attorney-client privilege documents. All of this will be made publicly available. My office first opened an investigation into the Sacklers in Purdue in March of 2015. It was after hearing the cries of families across our state. People who'd lost sons and daughters and mothers and fathers to an opioid crisis, fueled by the greed of one family, the Sackler family. We dug into it and we engaged along with AGs around the country into an extensive investigation. It led our office to file the first lawsuit by any attorney general in the country against members of the billionaire Sackler family and Purdue, based on what we had learned. We learned about how they directed their private drug company to mislead doctors and the public about OxyContin, how they worked to get more patients hooked on opioids at higher doses for longer periods of time, how they sat in boardrooms and schemed about how this was going to happen, and how they would continue to line their pockets, and line their pockets they did. As a result, the Sacklers became billionaires, and thousands of people in Massachusetts and across this country have suffered and died as a result. Since then, a lot has changed. The Sacklers have lost control of Purdue. Purdue's gone bankrupt. The Sacklers' family secrets that they worked so hard with lawyers and lobbyists and consultants to hide for years and years and years have now come to light. More than 100,000 individuals and families have come forward with their own claims against Purdue. The Sackler name has been removed from many of our trusted institutions. None of that happened without a fight. The Sacklers fought to keep our cases secret, and we won. They fought to dismiss our complaints, and we beat them. And when Purdue filed for bankruptcy and peddled statements and terms that would let them cover up their crimes, we kept fighting. Before we sued, the Sacklers had always used their wealth to keep their deception going, their profits flowing, and their secrets hidden. But that changes today. Today's resolution delivers the most important things that we've been fighting for: a reckoning that exposes the Sacklers' misconduct, strips them of their power, and provides money that will be dedicated entirely to prevention, treatment, and recovery. I'll start with transparency and disclosure. We told the families closest to this crisis and closest to this pain that we would not settle for less than complete disclosure. They told us the same. General James, General Ellison will remember this. We met last year with families affected by this crisis, including families who testified during Purdue's criminal trial in 2007, and families that have founded public advocacy and support groups. They asked us to commit to one thing: public disclosure of all Purdue documents. The families who've been hurt in this crisis deserve the full truth, and I can announce today that they're going to get it. We're requiring Purdue and the Sacklers to disclose to the public more evidence of their deadly misconduct than has ever been revealed in any case in history. We're requiring Purdue to post online every piece of evidence from every lawsuit and investigation of Purdue for the last 20 years. That's every deposition transcript, every deposition video, and 13 million documents. That public disclosure all by itself is the size of a landmark disclosure by the entire tobacco industry a generation ago that inspired reforms that saved countless lives. And today in this case, we're going to go further, because we're requiring Purdue to make public more than 20 million additional documents that have never been turned over to investigators before. This includes every non-privileged email that was sent to or received by every member of the Sackler family who sat on the board or worked at the company. No one's done this before, but Purdue isn't like any other case. And that's not all. We're requiring Purdue to waive its attorney-client privilege so that the public will see Purdue's confidential communications with its lawyers about the tactics they used to push opioids, about how they went to the FDA to get approval of OxyContin, about pill mill doctors and pharmacies diverting drugs, and about the billions of dollars Purdue paid out to the Sacklers. All of this evidence will be online forever, searchable, and free to the public. I know how much families and communities across the country care about the truth. For years, Purdue and the Sacklers told lies about their business, told lies about their drugs, and these lies hurt a lot of people. The Sacklers even decided to blame and stigmatize their victims, the very people who became addicted to their drugs. That stigma tore families apart and continues to do so to this day, and it's cost us so many lives. Exposing the Sacklers' evil acts is a step towards ending that stigma. It's a step towards healing. And because of this work, elected officials, regulators, scholars, journalists, and the public will finally know what they did, and we'll know so much more about how to make sure nothing like this happens again. This leads me to the money that the Sacklers and Purdue will pay. The Sacklers will pay more than $4.3 billion of their funds, of their money. It may be the largest amount any individual has had to pay ever for breaking the law. No investigation by the US Department of Justice, the FBI, the IRS, or the SEC has ever led to a payment by individuals as large as this case against the Sacklers. Of this amount, we estimate that $90 million will go to Massachusetts, and we will dedicate every single dollar to prevention, treatment, and recovery. But I will be the first to tell you that this is not enough. It is impossible to put a price on what the Sacklers did, what the Sacklers and Purdue took from our families. Paying $4.3 billion doesn't even begin to cover their debt. So I'm going to continue to keep advocating to change the systems that failed us in this case and along the way. I think it's clear that the system protected the billionaires and not the families they hurt. From the beginning, I've called out the Sacklers' abuse of our justice system. You know, I went to the Department of Justice, asked them to bring criminal charges against the Sacklers. They chose not to. I warned them last fall not to support Purdue's plans. I went to Congress to close the loophole so that the Sackler billionaires wouldn't be able to gain protection from this bankruptcy court. Congress didn't act. At every step, my priority has been to stand up for justice for the families devastated by the Sacklers' misconduct. There is more work to do, and I can assure you we will continue to pursue that. So before I conclude, I want to say a word about the work ahead. The story of the opioid crisis contains so much darkness, so many deaths, so much suffering, so much greed, and so many lies. The perpetrators who created this crisis are villains for the history books. And that's where Purdue Pharma and the Sacklers belong, in the past. Their time is over. But this is also a story filled with heroes, patients who've endured so much, grandparents who are raising their grandchildren, parents who've done everything to support their children, organizations that began with a few brave volunteers and have grown to help thousands, leaders who've called attention to the crisis in our communities of color where the deaths have only increased, especially over the last year, and so many people who had the courage to tell their stories, who experienced substance use disorder and know this problem firsthand. They all give us inspiration and insight. The future belongs to the heroes. Their voices will continue to guide our work. They have our attention and our support. So the work does not end today, though we appreciate that this is an accomplishment in this resolution. But know that our work continues for many years ahead. And I say that to the families out there all across this country. I'd now like to turn this over to Attorney General Tish James from New York, who has many of these heroes in New York and who continues to fight for them every single day. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Healey. And thank you, Attorney General Ellison, for joining us today. I also want to thank the numerous other attorney generals around the nation for their work on this negotiated mediation, and to the many staff members, all in our office who have worked tirelessly on this matter. And in New York, I want to thank Deputy Attorney General Jennifer Healey, but I know Jennifer Levy, and of course, Umair Khan, and of course, David Nachman for all their great work. For more than 2 decades, we all know that the opioid epidemic has wreaked havoc and destroyed lives for New Yorkers and Americans across this nation. And hundreds of thousands have died, and millions more have become addicted to opioids. And countless families have been torn apart and still feel the pain of the loss of their loved one. The trail of destruction and tragedy that has ravaged our communities in our respective states has basically hit every corner of this nation, and every corner of New York, and every region The opioid crisis has been so devastating that the number of American deaths from opioids in the last 2 decades is 6 times the number of American deaths in battle since World War I, making the opioid crisis more deadly than any foreign adversary that we've ever had to face. And the individuals responsible for the start of the entire epidemic are the Sackler family and the company that they controlled, Purdue Pharma. And over 2 years ago, when my office filed the most extensive lawsuit against different manufacturers and distributors responsible for the opioid crisis, we identified Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family as those who bore responsibility for starting this wave of addiction that hooked Americans on deadly opioids. After a delay due to the pandemic, here in New York, our trial against the different defendants has begun. My team is literally in court this morning, arguing our case at this very moment. But Purdue Pharma and the Sacklers are not in the courtroom. They're not on trial. No, this family and the company they control are not present because they took advantage of our nation's bankruptcy laws by having Purdue declare bankruptcy in September of 2019. And for nearly 2 years since that bankruptcy was declared, the company has used every delay, every tactic possible, and they've misused the courts, all in an effort to shield their responsibility, their accountability, their misconduct. It is upsetting that the Sackler family never declared bankruptcy, yet we're still granted all the same protections of bankruptcy as their company. And at this point, some may be asking, why are we accepting this mediator's proposal? Well, let me be clear. There is no perfect solution here. And as we have dealt with delay after delay from Purdue and the Sackler family, more and more Americans have become addicted to opioids. And as this one company and the family that controls it have taken advantage of loopholes in our legal system, they have continued to make millions of dollars off of death and destruction nationwide. No, this deal, I don't think any of us will say that this deal is perfect, but we can't let perfect be the enemy of the good. We can't let perfect be the enemy of getting results. And this deal gets one of the nation's most harmful drug dealers out of the opioid business. And if approved, will put an end to delays and legal maneuvering that could possibly continue for years across multiple continents. And further, I've always said my primary goal is to deliver critical funds into communities devastated by opioids as quickly as possible. This agreement will deliver up to $4.5 billion into communities ravaged by opioids on an accelerated timetable so we can invest in prevention and education and treatment and beds more quickly. New York alone is expected to receive at least $200 million and maybe more, making it one of the largest monetary settlements ever secured during my tenure as Attorney General. Another settlement that we announced just 2 weeks ago was a settlement against Johnson & Johnson for up to $230 million for their role in helping to fuel the opioid epidemic. And in these 2 weeks, we've also created a new law here in New York that places funds from opioid settlements and litigation into a locked box that are to be used solely towards abatement. And I want to thank the governor for signing the legislation last week. This is money communities will be able to count on to deal with opioid addiction instead of going into the state's general fund. So between the J&J settlement, as well as McKesson, which I failed to mention, and the mediation we're talking about today, it's close to $500 million that will specifically be used for abatement, for hospital beds, for treatment, for education, as well as prevention. Let me end by saying that I think we recognize that no amount of money will ever compensate for the pain and destruction we have collectively experienced. But pushing every dollar possible as quickly as possible into prevention and to avoid and to avert any further devastation is our top priority. And so I thank all of my colleagues, and I now turn the floor over to my colleague from Minnesota, Attorney General Keith Ellison.
Thank you, General James, and thank you, General Maura Healey, and thank you to everyone. I also want to thank our team who fought really hard and did the best they could for the people of the state of Minnesota. James Kennedy, Evan Romanoff, Eric Maloney, John Keller, Jason Plagencool, and others. And I want to thank them. We're very proud of the work that they did. You know, according to the Minnesota Department of Health drug overdose dashboard, about 4,821 Minnesotans died from opioid overdoses since about the year 2000. And the crisis is far from over. You know, last year, preliminary reports show that about 654 opioid-involved deaths in Minnesota occurred in 2020 alone, and they didn't stop in 2021. And of course, that's just the people who lost their lives there's a lot more devastation than that. Emergency room visits for opioid-involved overdoses increased from about 1,600 in 2016 to nearly 4,000 in 2020. Native Americans in Minnesota are 7 times more likely than white people to die of a drug overdose, and African Americans twice as likely. But that's just the statistics. About 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a friend of mine, a man who lived his whole life farming and working in the world of agriculture. You shake his hand and you can just feel how many pieces of tough machinery he had to handle because it's all in there. And at 85, he has a grip that'll probably bring you to your knees. He's a strong man. And him and his lovely wife of many years, 50 years, told me with a tremendous sadness, you could see the tear in his eye when he talked about his son that died as a result of an opioid addiction, and how he was doing everything he could for his son's son to try to get him through life. He told me his son was a good man. His son had an injury, started taking this product, and then eventually graduated to something much more severe, and he ended up losing his life. He said, I don't want you to let them get away with this. Money, very important. We need the resources, but they cannot get away with this so that they can just do it all over again, which is why this document disclosure has always been extremely important to me. And the fact that they have to cough up literally millions of documents, which will help tell the story, is very critical, because we've got to learn from these horrible lessons of this great tragedy. The Sackler defendants and Purdue were personally behind Purdue's deception about OxyContin's risk of abuse and addiction. The Sackler defendants were personally aware of the risks of abuse and addiction with OxyContin as early as 1999. And they intentionally tried to blame the people they hooked on this drug for their addiction, as they were manipulating to try to get them addicted. And despite their denials that opioids were addictive, the Sackler defendants at Purdue moved to profit to a tremendous degree from treatments for addiction even. So they want to sell you the addictive material and then try to profit from treatments for addiction on both ends. And again, Purdue and the Sackler defendants also kept an eye on and tried to influence Minnesota pain management standards in education, just so they could game the system better. And then the Sackler defendants paid themselves $4 billion in opioid profits, including an estimated $92 million in profits they made in Minnesota. And so I just want to say that this is an important resolution. If approved, it would be an important step forward in the fight toward chemical health and holding bad actors accountable. Now, look, I've been doing this kind of stuff for a while, been a lawyer 30 years, and sometimes it feels like there's always a better settlement to be had. Yeah, what we say today is we say yes to exposure, yes to transparency, yes to learning the lessons of the past, yes to putting sunlight on bad actors who would likely do it again if we did not insist on this exposure. We say yes to getting resources to people as quickly as we can, and we say yes to getting more than $50 million to Minnesotans. The fact is, you can always second guess a settlement, and I'm sure people will. That's what they do. But the bottom line is, we are proud to stand with Minnesotans, get them the resources that they need as soon as they can, and to tell the truth about what these folks did. So I will say that I'm proud to be with my friend Maura and Tish, standing with our states and everybody who lives in them for what I hope will be a much better future for all of us. And so I'll hand it back, and I guess it's time for questions.
Thank you all Given the time, I'm going to read some questions from the press. This one is for AG Ellison. This is from Guy Still with WCCO TV in Minneapolis. Could be for you and for all the panelists, whoever wants to chime in. Until very recently, more than a dozen AGs opposed the deal. It appears the Sacklers have recently agreed to pay an additional $50 million, which is a relatively small sum in comparison with the total settlements. What changed, resulting in the AG signing off?
Well, the 50 million is their last and final offer, and that's just the incremental increase. If you look at the larger picture, though, over the last 2 years, when we non-consenting states, which were about 24 in number, what we did is we increased the deal from around 3 billion to about 4.325 billion today. So it is a substantial increase over what we rejected a couple of years ago. And it is and the document disclosure is substantial and critically important as well. I mean, being able to see the documents that were the evidence that where they plotted and schemed to addict people, bottom line is, that's a substantial and important improvement. So there you go.
General Ellison, I would add and agree with everything that General Ellison just said. I'd also add that in this case, as folks know, Purdue filed for bankruptcy, and then the Sackler family ran to court, even though they're billionaires, to try to use the loophole that exists in the bankruptcy process that allows them to get relief. The court has scheduled a hearing on August 9th. At that hearing, the judge will hear on the proposed plan. It is a confirmation hearing. We anticipate that the judge would then soon thereafter be entering an order, entering that plan. Our job as AGs was to look at what our families needed and deserved. We listened to our families, and we made the decision to deliver on our promise to our families for disclosure. They wanted full disclosure, transparency, a light shown, the secrets to be told, everything come out. And that was what we were able to, achieve through the process. And that is what, for me, made me make the decision to take this and improve the plan and not risk not having that important component established. Transparency and disclosure, these families deserve it. And that is the difference and why we were at the place we are at today. I also want to extend my appreciation to Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney and her team. They filed a bill called the Sackler Act. And it was a bill that would have closed that loophole and prevented the Sacklers from abusing, from manipulating this bankruptcy process. I really appreciate the efforts of her team. Unfortunately, Congress has not acted on that legislation, but we will continue to fight to close any other loopholes that are out there and to make sure that we have the laws and policies in place to prevent this kind of bad action ever happening again, and to make sure that we can bring real justice and real accountability. But the accountability that we achieved through this resolution, the strongest point in my view is the public disclosure of tens of millions of documents that would never have seen the light of day, that will tell the whole story, all the conversations, all the discussions, all the planning, all the ways in which they were going to make money and evade accountability and regulation, all that went on back in 2007 when deals were struck and the like. This is what is important and should inform the work of the justice system going forward, should inform lawmakers going forward, and should inform public health experts going forward.
I too want to thank Congressmember Maloney. Based on conversations with Congressmember Maloney over the last 2 years and the last few months, I would hope that Congress would pass that Sackler bill. And I thank her for holding that public hearing as well. But it's important to note that as a result of our efforts, our collective efforts, through dogged discovery, through depositions across continents, through negotiations. We've obtained more money, more quickly, an extraordinary, robust document repository as a result of the efforts of Attorney General Maura Healey. We will flexibility for attorneys on the creation and the disposition of this new corporation, which New York has had some issues with, and at some point in time, we will consider whether or not we will be a part of it. And most importantly, shutting down Purdue's doors forever. And that is what is so really critically important. And again, ensuring that resources go towards prevention, towards beds, towards treatment, and preventing a similar type of epidemic from happening in the future. It's really all about accountability. And I really want to thank my colleagues. I respect those who have not signed on, but I do recognize that this litigation could go on for years. And there are counties and subdivisions in New York that are struggling right now with this epidemic. And it was really important to New York to get these resources to them as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And building on that question, I have one from Priyanka McCluskey at the Boston Globe to AG Healey. How exactly will settlement funds be used to combat the opioid crisis? Who decides how this money will be used?
Here in Massachusetts, we worked with our legislature to create an opioid trust fund. All of the money that Massachusetts recovers through our investigations and cases in the opioid epidemic go directly to that trust fund. All of those monies will be used for treatment and abatement. As a result of the legislation, we also have an advisory council that consists of people from various government agencies, as well as people with lived experience who will determine and advise where that money is going to go. But one thing that I am, I could say this, General James, General Ellison, and myself, we all are very much committed to making sure that the money we recover goes to support treatment and abatement and care. We're in this for the families, and I want to give it up to the families who really deserve the credit here for doing the work, for doing the hard work of coming forward, of sharing their lived experience, of telling their stories, of living with a heartache of a lost son or daughter or mother or father every single day, but have worked to make us better, to help us do our jobs as the people's lawyer. It will never be enough. It will never be enough. And no dollar will ever be enough. No dollar figure will ever be enough. But I want to thank the families for their voice here, and certainly they will have a voice when it comes to the disposition of funds recovered.
Thank you. And this question is from Mary Murphy in New York. Defense lawyers argue the Sackler family unfairly became the scapegoat for the opioid crisis in America. Why are they the top villains? It's for any AG.
Why are they villains? They're villains, again, because they were responsible for this opioid epidemic, because they created a company that they controlled, which continued to fuel this crisis. Because in my mind, they took advantage of countless number of individuals. And as a result of making billions of dollars, they then turned around and blamed these victims. And so, to ask that question would suggest that somehow they are blameless. And they are clearly, they should be held responsible for their conduct. And that's what we are doing here today. Are we satisfied with this agreement? By no means. Will this provide hopefully this will provide some consolation to the families? And there's no amount of money that can bring back any of their loved ones. But the reality of the situation is that the Sackler family is primarily responsible for this crisis. They should own up to it. And what they should do, obviously, is take responsibility for their misconduct, their illegality, and their efforts, again, at fueling this crisis. and avoiding and using every trick in the book to avoid responsibility.
Thank you. This question is from a couple folks. Will any of your states bring criminal charges against members of the Sackler family?
This is primarily a civil mediation, and the agreement is silent on criminal action.
Next question is from Beth Macy. Some folks think affected by this crisis think it's obscene for this NewCo or the public benefit company to continue making money selling yet more OxyContin. Can any of you please comment on this?
I want to be clear, this is something that changed materially from where negotiations were 2 years ago. Purdue is being wound down. Purdue will cease to exist as of 2024. That is something that is important, and the plan provides a way for that to happen. But I want to be really clear with the public that Purdue Pharma will cease to exist and is being wound down, and that will be accomplished, done with. Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family will be in the rear view and in the annals of history, so that everyone can understand exactly what transpired here, with hopes that this is a message to other corporate actors out there that this is what is going to happen to you. This is what's going to happen to your reputation, to your name, to your goodwill, if you decide to go down the road of putting people ahead of profits and just maximizing your own greed. You hear myself and General James and General Ellison speak with indignation in our voice. It is real. This is visceral for all of us who spend time sitting with families who've lost loved ones to this crisis. And I echo General James's words that the Sackler family should do more than they are doing today. At some point, it would be appropriate and long overdue for members of the Sackler family, whether they choose to do it in court or not, to acknowledge the wrongdoing and the harm and the hurt and the devastation that their family contributed to, created. That's what I would like to see.
Thank you. I'll go through just a couple more questions here, given the time. Grayson Danger from Forbes, to all of the panelists, or specifically to AG Healey. In May, you said the bankruptcy deal would set a terrible precedent by creating a roadmap for other powerful bad actors to escape the consequences of their actions. Did the concessions you're announcing from the mediation agreement change that, or do you still believe that deal sets a bad precedent?
It's the bankruptcy system right now that allows this bad precedent of having people who are billionaires who are not bankrupt come to a bankruptcy court and get relief from their claims, and end the ability of our offices to pursue our cases in our own state courts. That's the reality of the system right now. And it's why we went and worked with Congresswoman Maloney in support of the Sackler Act. They may not act, Congress may not act on that act before the confirmation hearing, but they still should pass that law so that future billionaires who do bad things aren't able to abuse and manipulate the current bankruptcy process in the way that the Sacklers have done. Now, what we did through this resolution is achieve and exact certain things that are meant to mitigate against the reality of the current justice system and the legal framework. And top of the list there was the creation of this public document repository, where all documents, including attorney-client privilege documents, are going to be available. That is what is unprecedented in terms of this resolution and important. So there are failures along the way that go back decades in terms of how regulatory agencies interact with pharma, in terms of some of what transpired years ago with the Department of Justice and this family, the role of lawyers and lobbyists. I think everything needs to be on the table in terms of what policies and laws we need to change. And I can assure you, I have no greater colleagues than Tish James and Keith Ellison and others in our group who stand at the ready to continue to do this work on behalf of the American people.
Thank you. One question from Allison King at NBC Boston. What was the most difficult thing you had to give up as part of this settlement?
Well, this is Keith. I'll just say, we've all said that there's no amount of money that's going to compensate the victims. And obviously we would have liked to have seen more resources to take care of all the treatment needs and all the losses and all the damage. But when you are talking about burying a child, I mean, how much is the dollar amount for that? So they should pay more. They should also, I think I'm speaking for myself, they should apologize. And I also think that there's more that should be done beyond that. But, you know, in the course of a negotiation, you know, you get the best you can get as quickly as you can get it for the people you represent. That is what we have done. And I'll hand it to my colleagues.
If there are no other comments, building on that apology point, Jeff Mulvihill at AP for any AG, did you ask the Sackler family members to apologize, and how did they respond?
They hid behind their attorneys. They lawyered up. They were quiet. They were silent. And they acted as if they were innocent, when in reality, we all know their hands were dirty. And so the reality is that the Sackler family should at least, at a minimum, apologize to all of those who lost loved ones. And at a maximum, they should put more resources that should go to these individual families. All across the state of New York as I travel, every individual who's been affected by this, and I can't tell you how many individuals I've met in every county, in every corner of the state, they've been touched. We need more resources, more beds, more prevention, more education. And clearly, no one is happy with this settlement. Can the Sacklers do more? Hell yeah. They can do a lot better. But it should first begin with an apology.
Just to add, I mean, we've been asking the Sacklers to apologize and acknowledge their wrongdoing, their culpability for years. They've refused to. Instead, we focused our attention with that, understanding that this is who they are, on pursuing accountability for families to the fullest extent of the law. And what we are announcing today reflects that. Is it everything that we want? No. Does the current system of justice allow us to achieve the kind of justice that our families so deserve? No. And we will fight like hell to change those laws and to change those policies. But I am confident that through the work of our teams and lawyers and dogged battle in the courts, alongside the public and the families, we have achieved the very best that we can under current law. Accountability and public disclosure, transparency being at the top. So there won't be a trial because the bankruptcy court in that process doesn't allow for that. I'm glad that all of us filed the extensive complaints that we did, telling the story based on our investigation of what happened. And now we'll know even more with the creation of this document repository. That's where the evidence will be. That's where all the information will be forever available to everyone. It's up to the Sacklers how they choose to live out the rest of their lives, what they choose to do, what their children and grandchildren choose to do. We can only control what we can control. And I think that this resolution is tough as it is for us to accept on some level, because our job as AGs is to pursue justice. And when we hit the limits of what the law affords us, and we know the pain that's out there, it's hard. But I'm confident we've done what we can do. And I know that we will continue to do what we can to fight to end stigma in this country, to fight for corporate accountability, and to fight to make sure that we don't have laws that continue to allow wealthy bad actors to manipulate and abuse the legal system.
So this is Keith Ellison of Minnesota, and I have to apologize for having to move to my next scheduled meeting. But I just want to thank Generals James and Healey for their heroic fight to hold the Sacklers in Purdue accountable. Minnesota is ever at the ready by your side to do that. And we are very much looking forward to the document disclosure. Many documents will be released very soon. Others will be later, but there will be literally millions of pieces of evidence to show what happened here. And I just want to say, the Sacklers in Purdue have been sued in the past, and they got non-disclosure agreements, which allowed them to go back to their bad behavior all over again. That's not going to happen here. And so we will stand with you, New York, Massachusetts, and every other state that wants justice for people. And with that, I must very apologetically ask you to excuse me at this time.
Thank you, AG Ellison. I think we can wrap for today. Certainly, there were some questions we weren't able to get to, but please feel free to reach out to myself or the respective offices that you're looking for more answers about today's resolution, and we are more than happy to help address that. So again, thank you all for tuning in. We will provide this recording as soon as possible, and we appreciate your participation.
Thank you. And the battle is not over.
Thank you.